Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. Today I have a really fun tutorial to share with you, and it's all about how to make your own glitter paper that doesn't shed, which is the best. Now here I have some of my normal glitter paper that I buy from the store. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, I love it, but it does shed. It gets all over my fingers and it does shed on projects. But all you need to make your own no shed glitter paper is some gel medium and glitter. I'm going to use both gloss and matte. They'll give you two different looks, but let's go ahead and start off with the gloss. Now, in order to do this technique, you're going to need that gel medium, some glitter, a palette knife, and something to mix it on. I'm using just a piece of plastic here. Use whatever you want to do your mixing on. What I do is put down a little bit of the gel medium. You're going to want enough to cover up whatever piece of cardstock you are covering with it. So think about the size. You don't need a whole lot because we're doing very thin layers here. But it's always better to have too much than not enough, in my opinion. So put enough down to where you know it's going to cover up your piece of cardstock. Then on your palette, you want to start adding glitter. You can use whatever glitter you have on hand. Here I am using some gold from Wow, which is an ultra fine glitter, and I'm just mixing. Now this is kind of an art, and you'll get used to it as you start to make your own more and more. But you want to add enough glitter to where it almost gets, the gel gets a thicker consistency and it almost starts to break apart. You're not quite at the level of it breaking apart, but it starts to get a little bit gritty. You'll feel it, you'll see it, you can see it here as I'm mixing it up. But you want enough glitter in there to where you really aren't seeing too much of the gel anymore. Now, once you get all of that glitter into the gel and mixed up very, very well, it's time to start applying this to cardstock. I am using heavyweight 100-pound white cardstock and using my palette knife to spread this on. I'm also working over a piece of paper here just to catch all that little excess. And this goes by really, really quickly. And I know this looks difficult, but I promise this smooths on so easily and in such a thin layer. You don't want this super thick, and unless you want some texture on your background, you don't want to add that texture. So use your palette knife to smooth it out. If you don't have a palette knife, an old credit card or gift card works great as well. This is going to warp a little bit too. Don't worry about that. As this dries, it will flatten back out on its own. You don't need to do anything to it. So there is a look at that all covered with glitter. I went all the way to the edges, but you certainly don't have to. But once you have that completely covered, you want to make sure and go ahead and knock off all the little extra pieces along the side. I just use my palette knife and scrape it along the edges. Then you sit it aside to dry. Now it looks a little dull whenever it's wet, but look at the shine you get when it is dry. It is gorgeous and it looks like a paper you would buy. Your edges might be a little rough, but you can cut those off. Now with this, you can see I have no glitter on my fingers. I'm going to rub this. I'm giving this some pressure too. I turned my fingers really white by giving it so much pressure. But you can see none of this comes off. It doesn't scratch off. It doesn't flake off. It really is stuck in there because that gel is like a glue. It holds everything in place. Then it dries to that nice shiny finish, so you still get the sparkle of the glitter. This die cuts beautifully as well. Just remember you're adding an extra layer of product on top of already thick cardstock. Whenever you do that, you might need to run your dies through more than once. So run it through and run it back. I also like to place a piece of paper over the top just so it doesn't pick up any weird textures from my cutting plate or the pressure doesn't kind of dull that glittery shine on there. Glitter is also plastic, so whenever you're cutting it, remember it's going to take a little bit more effort to get that cut through with your dies. The more intricate it is as well, it's not going to cut as easily, so you might need to add a shim in there too. Now with this, you do get some of those spidery kind of little paper webbings off on the sides, I just use my nail and run along the edges to get those off. That's really not a big deal. But even with cutting this frame, it picked up that little bit of embossing. Now I didn't want to waste the center of this, so I'm using a thanks die as well, and I'm going to cut out the center of that paper. You made it, you might as well use it. Again, I'm going to throw that piece of paper on top while I die cut this, just to protect the glitter so it doesn't lose its shine from the pressure. Now with this, it did take a little bit more working, but that pick tool from Tim Holtz, I use the retractable one so I don't hurt myself, but you can just kind of poke that out and it pokes those intricate dies right out. If you have any trouble with little pieces that don't want to cut, use your craft knife as well. That's going to help you get out those intricate dies if you go the die cutting route. If you want to just use your paper trimmer and cut this into a nice background, that works really well as well, and I'll show you that later on in the video. Now for this card, I'm going to finish it off very, very simply. I'm using a cake and cookie stencil from the Crafters Workshop. This is the Bricks. This is a cake and cookie stencil, but I use it in my craft room because I'm not a baker, like I've said, or not a very good one anyway. And to put through this stencil, I'm using some sugared lavender ink from Catherine Pooler, and I'm using a jumbo ink dauber to do that. I like to start darker towards the center and go light towards the outer edges. I also have those edges masked, so outside the frame is going to stay nice and clean and white. I'm working on an A2 side folding card base that I'm using horizontally, and now it's time to put everything onto that background. The back of your cardstock might be a little messy, but that's okay. It still glues down nice and flat. I use Nuvo Deluxe adhesive. You can also use a dry adhesive. That will work too. I just give it some pressure and hold it in place, and it lays down perfectly. You still pick up that embossing from the wood grain frame die that I used. And then I also glued down the thanks die right in the center the exact same way. And I've got this gorgeous glittery card all ready to go. Now the dry time on this glitter is pretty quick. I let mine sit overnight just because it was time to go to bed once I finished making my glitter cardstocks, but I'll show you later in the video. By the time I got through making all of these, the first one was pretty much already dry, so it doesn't take a whole lot of time. You're putting a very, very thin layer of this gel on. So moving on to my next card. For this, I am going to use matte gel medium. So you have two different kinds of your gel mediums here. You have the gloss, which is a nice glossy finish, and you have matte, which is going to be your matte finish. This is going to take away a little bit of that glossy shine that you get. However, it's still a beautiful look, and if you like the look of kind of that matte shimmer cardstock, this is what you want to use. Now for this, I'm going to put some down onto my palette and add a red glitter. This is a fine glitter as well, and this I actually got from the Target dollar spot. These they have a lot of times at Christmas, so right now you could probably find some, and then they also have a lot on Valentine's Day as well. Halloween they also have them. Pretty much every holiday they have some little vials of glitter. They last forever too. There's a ton in there and they're only $1. So you really can't go wrong. Now again, you want to continue to mix until you get that gritty texture. I have yet to go through a whole bottle of glitter, so to me, adding this much glitter isn't a huge deal. You're going to use a little bit of your glitter, but really when you think about how much you get in a bottle and how much you actually use on products, glitter lasts a really long time. So this is a great way to use up some of your stash. Now once I have that mixed in completely, I'm going to spread this on a piece of heavyweight white cardstock. This is going to go on and look horrible. I mean, it just is. It looks like dull, I don't know. It just doesn't look pretty, but I promise once it dries, it loses that white sheen to it, and it's super, super pretty. Again, you want to spread this on a nice thin layer and make it as smooth as possible if you don't want that texture. So I like to go over at the end and just kind of smooth it out and remove any excess. For this, I'll be die cutting that center, so I won't even need to do the edges of this. Now here it is nice and dry. You see you get that gorgeous red color once it dries. And I already used this on a different card. I wanted to die cut a little heart for a dinosaur to hold. That'll be up shortly, that video. But look at that. It gives a nice dull sparkle. You still pick up bits that hit the light with the glitter, but again, no shedding whatsoever with this matte gel medium. That gel medium acts as a glue and just glues everything into place. Nothing is falling off with that. Now to finish this card off, I am using a stencil from the Crafter's Workshop directly onto my card base. Now whenever I want to fill up the whole card base, what I like to do is tape it to the front after I've positioned it, flip it over, and tape from the back onto both sides. Then I can flip it back over and remove that piece of tape holding everything down on the front. This is going to give me nice clean edges. I'm not going to have any tape marks where anything was held down. Plus I have the ability to move this around as I want, and the stencil isn't going to go anywhere. I don't have to worry about the stencil moving and then repositioning. To put some ink through this, I'm using my Jumbo ink dauber, and I'm using It's a Girl ink from Catherine Pooler, starting darker towards the center and fading it out as I go towards the edges. There I've got that gorgeous background, which just adds a little something to the finished card. For this, I am going to go ahead and die cut my glitter paper again. Now, for I don't know how many times this is now, remember to go ahead and put that extra piece of paper over the top just to protect that glitter from getting any indentations in it. And weird kind of textures. I went ahead and die cut with a cat scrappiness die, which is the zigzag heart dies, and then I use that same die along with their regular hearts, which inlay into those to create a nice little frame. Now I cut a very small heart from the center. I went ahead and went back in with a larger heart and die cut more out of the center just so I could see more of that glitter cardstock from the inside of the frame. To glue this frame on, I am going to go ahead and use my Nuvo Deluxe adhesive again. This works really great to glue on top of that glitter, but again, you can use dry glitter too, or dry glue as well, your tape glues. That will work. This glues very, very easily. I like to either put some pressure on with my hands to hold everything down, or here I'm using an acrylic block. Then over the top of that heart, I'm also going to add a Hugs die cut for my sentiment, using that same Nuvo Deluxe adhesive just to apply some glue on the back, and then placing that right down over the top of the heart. I popped that heart up with some foam adhesive and applied that to my card base, and there you have it. Super simple card, that nice hugs right in the center, and that matte gel just adds a really fun texture to this glitter paper. It's not as shiny. It still picks up bits of the light though, and you can tell it's glitter, but it's much more matte. So I love this one too. It's just about what look you're going for with what medium you want to use for your project. All right, moving on to our last project. This one is a lot of fun. I'm going to apply the glitter gel onto some acetate. This is actually Duralar film, which is a little bit thicker. It's the 0.005, and it has a nice shiny finish to it. I'll leave this link down below. I buy mine on Amazon. It comes in a large, kind of like a watercolor paper pad kind of look, but it comes with each individual sheet separated by a thin layer of tissue, so there's no scratches or anything on it. It's a really good film to use for your shaker cards or for this technique. Now for my gel medium, I am using the gloss, but matte would work as well for this. Just remember the two different looks you're going to get from each one. Now for this, I'm using some copper glitter. This is from WOW as well. Any glitter is going to work here. I just like the look of the fine glitter. And remember, the thicker your glitter gets, the chunkier it gets, I should say, the more it's going to flake off. So your fine glitter is really going to be what's going to be your no shed glitter. But the chunkier it gets, the more likely you are to have some shedding with that, because the gel medium just won't wrap around all of those little individual pieces. So keep that in mind as you pick out your glitters for your glitter paper. Now again, I'm just going to start mixing and adding as much glitter as I want here. The more glitter you add, the more coverage you're going to have, because this gloss gel does dry super clear. Make sure you give it a good mix too. You don't want any huge chunks of glitter in there. I like to continue adding glitter until I get this gritty feel as I'm mixing with my spatula, and it's going to almost want to separate a little bit, but you don't want it so chunky with glitter that it does kind of start to crumble, and you'll get the feel of it once you start. Here's a closer look of what the gel looks like once I'm done mixing it. You start to see less and less of that white gel as you add more and more of the pigmented glitter. Now for this, I'm going to smooth down my glitter gel onto this acetate. This is a slick surface, so it is a little bit trickier to get a nice smooth surface, but just take your time and work. You do have a little bit of play time. This doesn't dry super duper fast, but you want to get a nice smooth texture, as smooth as you can on here. Now the beauty of this is, even if you don't get a smooth texture with this, I'm going to be using the opposite side. So think about your acetate. It's clear, right? So on one side, you can add your glitter and have a nice textured surface. But then on the opposite side, you have a really smooth surface that you can still see the glitter through. So I went very heavy-handed on the right-hand side, and on the left, I went a little bit more see-through. Now, as I was doing this last one, I did all of these glitter cardstocks right in a row. I just cut them apart for the purposes of the video. But as I finished up with my last copper one, by the time I was done with that, my gold was pretty much dry. I mean, it didn't take a whole lot of time for that to go from completely wet to pretty much set. So you have, you don't have to wait too long for them to dry. You're putting a very thin layer on. And I just wanted to throw that in the video to show you how fast this actually does dry. Now, once I had my acetate completely covered how I wanted it, I had a little bit of copper glitter gel left over, so I went ahead and just smoothed that onto an extra piece of heavyweight white cardstock, and that's just going to give me more paper to play with later on. But once this is dry, you have a no shed glitter on that's textured on the one side of your acetate. But if you flip this over, you have a completely smooth. The glitter is going to be secure because it's on the opposite side of the paper. So even if, somebody takes a knife to this, they're not going to get the glitter off, or like a scraper. So if you want completely no shed, even if somebody kind of scratches at it, that's going to be this technique where you just flip the paper over and use it to where the glitter is on the other side of the card, or on the other side of the acetate, and it's secured behind that layer of plastic. And it's just a really cool look as well. So to finish this card off, I'm actually using the Waffle Flower Carnation stamp set. This is a gorgeous stamp set, and it's a layering one. Now this is a fun layering one because it doesn't have to be lined up perfectly, which is kind of my favorite kind of layering stamp set. But in order to use this stamp set, I am using my Misty. I'm stamping on heavyweight white cardstock. I started off with icing on the cake ink from Catherine Pooler. Then I'm going to start layering up the layers inside of these flowers. So I'm starting off with the first, and I'm using Sweet 16 dye ink from Catherine Pooler. Now on my second layer, again, I'm going to use that Sweet 16 ink, but I didn't have a mid shade of purple that I wanted to use with my two purples. So to get around that, I'm going to use that same ink that I used first and just double stamp it over the first layer of ink. That's going to build up the ink and make it a little bit darker, so I get that nice ombre look without having a lot of ink pads on hand. Now for my third and final layer, I'm going to go in with some sugared lavender ink and stamp that down for my final bit of shading in these flowers. And there I've got some gorgeous flowers. Now for the base, I'm using eucalyptus ink, and I just stamped in those stem stamps. This is one of those stamp sets where it's super easy to follow and line up, so it's not a lot of thinking. And if you have any trouble lining up your stamps, Waffle Flower does offer like the guides and stuff. A lot of stamp companies do that, but just go online, look up your guides, and there you'll be able to find out how to layer up your stamps. Now I went ahead and cut out that two little bud stamp that I stamped, and I just did that 5.5 inches long by 3 inches wide. And then for my little flower that I stamped on top, I fussy cut that out very quickly, and then I'm popping that up with some foam tape to complete that little cluster of flowers on my card base. I love the way this turned out. It's not so overpowering with the stamping, and it just gives a nice watercolored look almost. Now to add that little strip of glitter, I'm going to go ahead and cut my acetate. This cuts like butter. I'm just using my paper trimmer here, and really it is not hard to cut at all. I'm just going to go ahead and put it in my paper trimmer, cut off a little strip of it, and then that's going to be my strip that I place on the right hand side of my flowers. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to go ahead and put down some tape adhesive. That's going to hold this glitter in place. Now, for this particular card, I'm not going to use the side of the glitter where the glitter actually is. Because I use that acetate, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over, and the glitter will be on the back side, and that's going to give me a very, very smooth surface. It's also going to lock in that glitter, so even if somebody were to take like their fingernail and scrape at it, it's not coming off. This is truly no shedding whatsoever. Now, once I have that done, I can go ahead and trim off the little excess with some scissors, and there is my glitter paper all ready to go. This is one of my favorite ways to make it. I think it's gorgeous, and it just adds an extra layer of shine and security to that glitter. To finish this card, I'm going to go ahead and add my sentiment. I am using a Joy Claire sentiment on this card, and I'm stamping it with Pinecone ink, VersaFine Clear ink, onto a white cardstock flag banner that I die cut. I pop that up on the bottom with some foam tape to complete the entire card. There's a closer look at that glitter paper. You still get the shine. You still get the textured look without any texture to it because it is nice and smooth on the opposite side. And if you're worried about kind of your smoothing abilities with your palette knife, this is the way to go, because no matter how textured it is on the other side, it's going to look smooth on the opposite side of the acetate. So if you're just starting out, that might be the route you want to go if you're not, you know, comfortable with your palette knife skills, I guess. That is going to do it for me today. One final look at all three cards. Remember to use what you have on hand, your glitters, your gel mediums. That is going to do it for me today. I want to thank you guys for watching. If you want any of the supplies I used, they're all going to be listed down in the description box below. Or if you have any questions about what I used, head down there and you'll find all those answers. Happy crafting, everyone.